Despite growing interest in diversity and inclusion, African Americans are still underrepresented. Systemic racism remains a barrier to the upward mobility of Black professionals.
Our fight for justice cannot merely focus on the legal system. It must deal with the economic system that it protects.
Now is the time for change.
Marches and movements only have meaning when they lead to structural change in the economic system.
Introducing the Black Idea Coalition. We are dedicated to helping companies achieve Black inclusion, diversity, and equity in action.
Our time is now. Follow the money. My name is Matthew Wadley, and I endorse this message.
Join us on September 23rd for the Black Idea Summit. Register now at theblackidea.com. Let's create an equitable future for the Black community.
Greetings and welcome to the inaugural summit of the Black Idea Coalition. We're so honored that you chose to spend this time with us, and we're excited to share with you some awesome presentations and invite you into some conversations about what's happening in our country and how we achieve Black parity in the workplace. We're so excited to see the movement from all corners of this country, from all walks of life, from all sorts of people who are demanding justice. But we have to recognize that the tree of systemic racism has economic roots. No matter where you see it in our society, whether it's the health disparities that we've just seen and the pandemic disproportionately affecting the African American community, whether it's in education or in housing, certainly in employment and policing, all these issues can be traced to the economic roots of the economic disparities that are a part of the sordid history of our country. And that's why we formed the Black Idea Coalition. IDEA stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, and action. It is a space that is being created so that the larger corporate community might have a place to interface with the Black business world. We recognize that there are a number of companies who are stepping up to the plate. We've seen companies pledge billions of dollars towards bringing equity in the workplace and in business. But the question is, where do those transactions take place? The truth is there are not enough relationships in the business world with the Black business world. And so one of the things that the Black Idea Coalition is committed to do is to create that clearinghouse where companies that are trying to get to be a part of the supply chain can engage and can learn how to be successful in the RFP process and move their company to the next level. We want to encourage and identify private equity firms and banks that are willing to invest in Black communities. And we have partners that are going to be speaking to us today to help to build out that capacity. We're so excited that we have partners that are going to help to bring about parity in the employment world, whether it's at the entry level or mid-level managers, the C-suite, or even on the board. We have partners that are going to present today. They're going to provide research. They're going to give best practices. They're going to provide models so that we as individuals can be part of the process of holding companies accountable. We recognize that we don't want this to simply be a moment that is performative, where companies release press releases about what they're going to do and then kind of go back to business as usual. So we need to have a mass group of persons that are engaged and making sure that companies are keeping their word or stepping up to the plate. But at the same time, we also want to have a place where companies can know they can come to help to get their DEI, their diversity, equity, and inclusion game together. And so we have consultants that specialize in this area. They have technological tools that individuals can use to find out what they can expect if they go to work for a particular company. We're so excited because we believe that today is going to be the launching of not simply a movement, but an infrastructure that will last for decades to come and will really cause there to be a shift and new wealth center in this country by developing it and the Black community. We recognize that we need many partners from many different spaces. And so you'll be hearing today from persons that specialize in federal legislation and law and the kinds of laws that need to be passed in order to move the dial. We're going to hear from persons today that specialize in capacity building. And so if you serve in a local community and you want to see that community develop housing that is sustainable for African Americans so that the tide of gentrification can be stayed in that area, then we want to introduce you to a company that does exactly that. They can do a market study for you. They can help you put together their RFP so that you can compete and get the dollars you need to develop that project. We're so excited about the number of organizations that have already come alongside of us, but we also are soliciting others. If there are businesses, if there are organizations that are committed to this work, then we want you to be a part of this coalition. My grandmother was right. Many hands make for light work. And when you come alongside of us, you will aid and assist us and bring about the day where we achieve Black parity in the business place. Now, I know somebody's saying, wait a second, this sounds all good, but didn't I hear that you're a reverend? What in the world is a pastor doing in the business world? Well, let me help you understand that that's actually a part of the history of the African-American pulpit. I'm an AME pastor, and our founder over 200 years ago, Richard Allen, started off not as a preacher, but as a businessman. He was a chimney sweeper. He actually used to work for President George Washington, and then he owned his own blacksmith shop. In fact, when he started his church, it started in the blacksmith shop. My point is that even though the Black Idea Coalition is a non-sectarian organization, we recognize that we need partners from all over the community to come together along with partners outside of the Black community so that we can really make a difference. We don't want this moment to pass and find ourselves in the same position, but rather we want to seize this moment to create a shift in our society, a shift in our economy, and a shift in the way that we do business. So right now, I need your help. I'm going to ask you to do some things, and I hope that you'll partner with me. First thing I'm going to ask you to do is to spread the word right now. We're just getting started, and there are others who didn't know that this was happening today, but you can be a part of informing them and letting them know. So please reach out by text, email, share it on your social media. In fact, if you're on social media right now, go ahead and host a watch party so that your friends can stop watching things that won't give them any benefit, but they can be a part of something that's really going to make a difference. We're also encouraging you to be prepared to take notes. You're going to hear great things, and you're going to want to capture them. You're going to want to do additional research and start to work on these opportunities and initiatives. So come on, let's get ready to get to our first panel. We're excited to celebrate the inaugural summit of the Black Idea Coalition. We're so excited to welcome Dr. Margaret O'Meara to the platform. She is a professor of history at the University of Washington. She also is the author of The Code, Silicon Valley and the Remaking of America. It's a book that really describes the evolution of the tech industry and how what we are experiencing now in terms of the advent of technology really has been decades in the making. It's the result of investment from the public and private sectors, for how government really has chosen winners and losers over time, how individual networks and personal and professional networks have allowed some to be involved and some to be excluded. What's interesting about the book for me is that it's not just about the tech industry, but because she, in a very systematic way, identifies the challenges of lack of diversity in Silicon Valley, the lack of diversity in some of these Ivy League schools that received great investments from government over years and over decades, you begin to see a larger picture of how we find ourselves in 2020 with African Americans still being so underrepresented, not just in the tech industry, but in so many different industries, because the same dynamics have taken place time and time again. And I want to personally and publicly thank Dr. O'Meara. We did not know one another before the advent of this summit, but I reached out to her and she immediately consented to come on with us today and to share from the benefit of her research that has taken years to put together and has contributed to this book. I actually want to encourage you to download the book and check it out. I promise you, you will have a better understanding of the market. You'll have a better understanding of technology. You'll have a better understanding of what it takes to really build an industry and to include people. And it's not as hard as we think. And so I'm thankful that not only Does she give us a historical framework to appreciate where we are? But she also is forward looking and gives us some opportunities to imagine how we can right the ship. So please welcome Dr. O'Mara to the platform.
Hi, it's really great to be with you today. I'm Margaret O'Mara. I teach history at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I write about the history of the U.S. technology industry. I published a book last year called The Code, which is a history of Silicon Valley from the 1940s to the present. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to put the history of this industry into broader social and political context. And so that's what I want to do today really quickly, is seed some ideas that expand the way that we talk about the lack of racial diversity, particularly the underrepresentation of Black people in engineering roles and in managerial roles in tech, that goes beyond the so-called pipeline problem, the fact that which was identified a few years ago about how there's not enough engineers being trained, which has then evolved into the retention problem, both of which are very real. But I think to understand the question of retention and the question of how we achieve diversity, inclusion, and representation in tech, which is critically important in this sector, not only for in terms of for society, but also for the businesses themselves, is to contextualize them more broadly in history and understand that the reason tech looks the way it does, the reason that we have such a lack of representation, particularly in the C-suite and at the managerial levels, why it is so overwhelmingly white, so overwhelmingly male, and where racial diversity is mostly with South and East Asian managers and executives, but even then, it still overwhelmingly does not reflect America. We need to think bigger and look back. And one of the things that I look in my research is how much Silicon Valley as a place shaped not only the technology industry in the Valley, but more broadly the technology industry worldwide, because this place has become the command and control center of the global technology industry and has this outsized influence on the culture of the companies that are in this space. So Silicon Valley grew where it did in part because it was the place it was. It was an agricultural valley in California. It was an agricultural valley that starting in the 1950s and going forward became heavily suburbanized. And the history of mass suburbanization in the United States is also a history of exclusion, racial exclusion, segregation, a whole host of public programs and private real estate development that was deliberately designed to exclude people of color, and particularly Black people. Unsurprisingly, the South Bay of San Francisco that becomes the Silicon Valley, which in its agricultural era was heavily Latino and Asian American. Those populations don't go away. They get kind of pushed to the margins. And there always has been a Black population in the Valley, a small one, but it has been there. But again, is pushed to the margins as this new suburbanization, overwhelmingly, almost entirely white middle class, begins in the 1950s. So that's one dimension. It's a very white place historically, the capital of tech. A second factor is institutions. What built tech regions like Silicon Valley, what built the technology industry? It's research universities, in particular their engineering programs. Those programs in the 50s and 60s and going forward were almost entirely, in fact, entirely male and almost entirely white. And where you did get racial diversity was often with foreign-born students rather than American-born African Americans and Latinos and others. So you have this overwhelmingly white and male kind of pipeline that's setting up this system. The central institution in in Silicon Valley's history is, of course, Stanford University, which has had a small Black student population, but to this day, Black students are still, as of the time I'm speaking you, there are faculty and students at Stanford who are trying to persuade the administration to create a Black Studies program, an African American Studies program standalone, because it doesn't even exist as a department. So this is again, an institution that by design and by history was very white, was not a place where that has significant and was open to many Black people, and particularly in the engineering divisions. Again, the institutions and the place are really important in understanding how this incredible container of innovation and innovative companies is created. It's also about people. And as I mentioned before, the suburbanization of the 1950s and 60s is, creating these incredible residential communities for white families. And that is again, the people who are migrating to California are overwhelmingly white. There are Black engineers, but they are not in significant numbers among those who are migrating to California to work in the small electronics and aerospace industries. And so the early startup companies, this is Fairchild Semiconductor, which is considered like the grandfather of all tech startups, this legendary company whose founders include the founders of some of the major venture capital and technology companies in the Valley going forward, including the co-founders of Intel, the co-founder of Kleiner Perkins, and other companies. As you can see, this is a very racially stratified and gendered company. You have white men at the top in their white shirts, and you have women, white middle-class women, who are in the background of this picture on the production line building the electronic equipment. And so this dimension is, of course, this is 1960. That's what America was like in 1960, right? So why is this still operational today? It's important today because the magic of Silicon Valley is its networks, is the connections from one generation of technologists to the other. So the first generation of technologists, they become the venture capitalists of the next. They are betting on the winners of the next generation. So you have the semiconductor microchip generation of the 1960s. They have their big exits. Some of them become investors and venture capitalists. They become investors in companies of the personal computer generation, like Apple. That personal computer generation of the late 70s and early 80s, when they have their big exits, they become the investors in the dot-com generation. Here's Netscape, which is a prime example of a company that was built by this Silicon Valley network, whose venture investors were Kleiner Perkins and these veterans of these earlier generations of tech, where you had a young entrepreneur, Mark Andreessen, who's the kid in the yellow tie, sitting on one computer, who is brought in with adult supervision, Jim Clark, this guy sitting on the other computer from an older generation, who's bringing his managerial organizational expertise. Now, we all know that these networks of mentorship are critically important in building any sort of business, but recognizing that the racial and gender makeup of that network and the kind of the informal nature of these ties, where people are looking for investments that they think are good bets and that have leadership that is a good bet. And they're looking for what one venture capitalist infamously slipped up and called pattern recognition, where you're looking for a guy in a hoodie, a kind of geeky guy who looks like the person who ran a successful company before. So really, the story about tech is about opportunity. Now we have this incredibly bifurcated landscape in tech, in Silicon Valley and beyond, where you have, on the one hand, people who work at Google, who get to ride their bikes around campus all day when they're not working from home, who have incredibly privileged positions. And then you have, on the other hand, the working class of the Valley that has literally been physically pushed out, where you have people boarding buses in the Central Valley of California to go to work in the Tesla factory, which is just in the East Bay, Elon Musk's Tesla factory, where you have a working class that's been completely displaced because of housing costs and because a lack of opportunity to get into those more privileged places in tech. I talk about more of this history in my book, and this is just a bit of tapping into it, but I think it's really important to recognize the racial discrimination that is embedded in so much of the pieces of the tech ecosystem. When we recognize them, then we know how to open them up. When we recognize the historical truths, then we get to go to work and recognize this is not just about an engineering pipeline problem. It is not only a retention problem, but it has to do with the whole ecosystem of tech and recognizing that it is not a meritocracy. It is actually a place where close personal connections and, yes, people's unconscious and conscious biases have shaped opportunity. And thinking about diversity inclusion going forward, we have this history can be a tool and a really critical tool in building a more inclusive tech world. And I wish you guys all the luck in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for your contribution. And I hope, again, that you all will consider picking up the code. I promise you it will be enlightening for you. So glad to welcome now to the platform Dr. Carl Reed, who serves as the Executive Director of NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. He also is one of the founding leaders of the Black Idea Coalition. He's contributed of his great experience and has helped us to really shape what we believe is a systematic approach to writing the issues of diversity, equity, inclusion that still need to be addressed in our economy and in business. Dr. Reed brings embarrassments, gift, and talent, but he couples those with a wonderful humility, a keen insight, and concern about people, and a sensitivity to where we are in this moment. And so he's going to provide some material that I think you're going to find instructive, that helps you to understand better the work that we're about here at the Black Idea Coalition. I know that I speak for all those who are part of NSBE, that you all are appreciative of Dr. Reed's leadership, and NSBE certainly will be better off because of his contribution, and this country will be as well. I think it's interesting that if you listen to Dr. O'Mara's talk, she referenced so many times the need and the lack of Black engineers, the lack of engineers that were recruited from the African American community that would have brought diversity in at the ground level of the tech industry, and how that would have in fact helped that industry to grow organically its inclusion. But because that didn't happen then, Black Idea is here now, and Dr. Reed is going to tell you how we're going to work it out. Let's go.
Thank you, Reverend Watley, for your kind and very generous introduction. As he said, my name is Carl Reed, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Society of Black Engineers, or NSBE as we call it. And I'm also a member of the Board of Directors of the Black Idea Coalition. So I'm so grateful that you decided to join us to kick off this exciting new initiative. What I'd like to do over the next few minutes is begin my remarks by introducing you to NSBE, provide you with a brief discussion about why diversity matters, then discuss why we're partnering with this effort, and finally, I'll provide some detail about the Black inclusivity model framework that is at the heart of the Black Idea Coalition. Now, NSBE is one of the largest student-governed associations based in the United States. It was founded in 1975 by 6 Black engineering students from the South Side of Chicago who were attending Purdue University at the time. Since then, NSBE has grown to just under 21,000 members who range from third graders to seasoned technical professionals occupying the C-suites in corporations, universities, and government agencies. Its mission is to increase the number of culturally responsible Black engineers who excel academically, succeed professionally, and positively impact the community. Now, I'm a product of the organization, having served as a chapter officer when I was an undergraduate at MIT, and as a national chair after discovering my passion to increase awareness and opportunity in engineering for underserved and underrepresented students, initially in the local Boston and Cambridge communities. Now, for 45 years, NSBE has been a trusted diversity partner for countless multinational companies, tech firms, startups, and technology-focused government agencies. Our conferences and conventions attract upwards of 14,000 participants and over 300 exhibitors to the career fair floor. However, we only represent 4.2% of the engineering degrees awarded and just 3.6% of all engineers in the workforce in the United States. Clearly, more has to be done, and that's why we're here. But why is all this important? Well, because diversity matters. There is mounting evidence that demonstrates that organizations with diverse leadership have better financial returns, higher employee satisfaction and retention, and are much more innovative. For instance, a recent study by the Boston Consulting Group of 1,700 companies in 8 countries found that companies with above average diversity on their management teams report higher innovation revenues by 19 percentage points than those with below average leadership diversity. Now, why is this the case? Because innovation is born from the intersection of concepts, ideas, disciplines, and cultures. Author Franz Johansson calls this the Medici effect. Now, early in the year, in addition to our publications, our conferences, workshops, and talks with universities to help them increase the success of Black engineers, we began to receive requests from our corporate partners as well for strategies to create more inclusive workplaces. In other words, to move from a diversity conversation to an inclusion conversation. Now, some of our partners had great success getting Black talent into the door, hiring them right out of college, for example, but they were having difficulty retaining them. Many left the company after just a few years, if that. Now, our partners learned an important lesson. Fostering diversity was an important first step, but diversity is not inclusion. And that's what the McKinsey report found in 2020. In Diversity Wins, How Inclusion Matters, they write what we all know. Hiring diverse talent isn't enough. It's the experience they have in the workplace that shapes whether they remain and thrive. You know, Dr. Robert Sellers, the Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Michigan, offers this metaphor. He says, diversity is being invited to the party. Equity means everyone gets a dance, but inclusion, everyone contributes to the playlist. Now, I know there are many variants to this metaphor, but the message is clear. Creating inclusive workplaces and communities is the goal, and diversity is a means to that end. I like how OSU's Kirwan Institute defines inclusion. They write, inclusion requires this simultaneous experience of feeling valued for your uniqueness and having a sense of belonging on your team. Now, NSBE's exemplary industry partners like Intel, Northrop Grumman, and Dell have achieved a great deal of success hiring, but they're also successful at retaining and promoting Black engineers. These companies are intentional and proactive about fostering a culture of inclusion. In other words, they share the playlist. By having tough conversations, institutionalized training, and building into their personnel policies systems to both incentivize inclusion and penalize intolerant behaviors. Now, the floodgates of requests for partnerships opened for us after a police officer put his knee on the neck and killed George Floyd on May 25th. As you know, protests sprung up in Minneapolis and Washington, D.C., and all across the United States and around the world, not just demanding an end to police brutality, but also calling for the dismantling of the symbols, practices, and funding that reinforce systemic racism in all aspects of our society. After the first few weeks of this initial national reckoning on race, I began to ask the question, what next? What can we as a country do beyond protests to affect lasting change? What can industry, schools, government, and communities do to root out institutional racist policies and practices that have blocked the education, advancement, and success of Black people in every sector? Public commitments to social justice are an important first step, but what was needed was a strategic approach that transforms organization systems to produce lasting structural change that can achieve Black equity internally, in the broader communities in which they operate, and their networks of influence. After all, It was management expert Sir Edward Deming who said, every system is perfectly aligned or perfectly designed to produce the results it gets. Therefore, to change the results, we must change the systems that are producing it. There needed to be a framework, a list of recommendations or demands or practices that companies and other groups can follow, a roadmap to turn their pledges into practice. It turned out my pastor, Matthew Watley, and his wife, Shauna Watley, were having the same conversation. What can we do to affect systems change? How can we operationalize this moment to help organizations turn their pledges into practice? Subsequent conversations with him gave birth to the Black Idea Coalition. Now, the foundation of the Black Idea Coalition's work is the Black Inclusivity Model, which provides a framework to achieve equitable workplaces along 4 dimensions underscored by data. Now, allow me to drill down on each of these components to share more details. Diversity. Achieving representative parity for Blacks at all levels and across the mainstream business units of an organization, and ensuring an inclusive board of directors. By representative parity, it's reflecting the representation of Blacks in the communities in which the company or organization operates. In terms of equity, it's benchmarking and identifying disparities on key employment metrics such as recruitment and offers, hiring, compensation, tenure, promotions, bonuses, EOC complaints, departures and terminations, and auditing policies and procedures to surface and eliminate systemic racism, such as how new employees are recruited, and then redressing any gaps that are arisen from the climate surveys. In terms of inclusion, that's the playlist. The company-wide climate surveys not only are conducted, but the results are distributed widely. And compulsory implicit bias and anti-racist training. We're looking at regular company-wide town hall conversations about race hosted by the CEO, and establishing increasing the funding for Black employee resource groups, and ensuring that they all get executive champions. In terms of the ecosystems, looking at the number of Black-owned suppliers and contractors, focusing and pooling investments in corporate responsibility in K-12 and STEM education in under-resourced communities, and looking at the policy agenda that the company is undertaking that ensures that you're reducing structural barriers for Black communities, students, and workers. And of course, examining sponsorships, much like FedEx did with the recent Washington football team. And then finally, making sure data are actionable and available, defining metrics to track and benchmark the success and progress toward DEI inclusion, creating dashboards and reporting DEI data and progress against equity targets. And this is key, linking these efforts to financial results and corporate mission. To the last point, as management expert Peter Drucker said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Now, as an engineer, this quote really appeals to me. Many DEI efforts fail because they're tied to a charismatic leader with no staff, no budget, or no buy-in, or they're driven by feel-good movements that fade with the emotion or political winds of the time. One critical reason why we know this effort will have the transformative impact we expect is that it's undergirded with data. In other words, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And we have a powerful data analytics partner, Canaries, that I had the pleasure to introduce. Canaries is a data analytics company that provides a platform for companies to rate and track their DEI metrics against others in and across their industries. We chose to partner with Canaries because of their breakthrough technology, their approach to foster DEI transparency and accountability, and their ability to empower employees to anonymously rate their workplaces on inclusivity, and of course, their leadership team. And I'm delighted to introduce one member of the leadership team, the co-founder and CEO of Canaries, Mandy Price.
Hi, my name is Mandy Price, and I'm the CEO of Canaries.
And hi, I'm Star Carter, and I'm the COO of Canaries.
Canaries is a technology platform that uses groundbreaking technology to allow companies to measure inclusion and equity within their workplace. We use diversity, equity, inclusion benchmarks and identify areas of improvement and growth by gathering and analyzing cultural and demographic data, industry rankings and trends, and data collected from employee assessments. Canaries uses artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and predictive analytics to help organizations benchmark and optimize their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy through the use of real-time data.
And we started Canaries in 2018 because we know that data can solve D&I issues and inequities. And given our experiences, we knew we could build a technology platform to solve this for employees and companies everywhere. We saw a breakdown in communication, even at the well-meaning companies, and we wanted to solve for this. Mandy and I both experienced the effects of inequities in the workplace and throughout our lives. And we have very similar backgrounds. We attended college together. We continued on to Harvard Law School together. And then we even worked at the same law firm after law school. We shared many of the same experiences, things many Black women have also encountered, both in and out of the workplace. And I can vividly remember going into Mandy's office at our law firm and talking with her about our experiences. Many of them were the same. 57% of Black employees report being discriminated against when it comes to pay and promotional opportunities. This cannot happen if a workplace is truly equitable.
We decided to leave our law firms to pursue what we were really passionate about, creating diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's where the name Canaries comes from. The canary in a coal mine was once a mining tradition to ensure working environments were safe for workers. Coal miners carried the birds into the mines to monitor the quality of the air while they worked. A healthy bird emerging at the end of the day symbolized an environment that was non-toxic, desirable, and safe. Similar to how the birds protected miners 30 years ago, Canaries helps organizations create inclusive workplaces and foster healthy work culture. We are the canary in a workplace.
And 2 years later, after the inception of Canaries, with the inflection point at the killing of George Floyd and countless others at the hands of police brutality, we now have a renewed focus on racial justice, and companies are now publicly declaring their commitment to racial justice or to supporting the Black Lives Matters movement. It's been really inspiring to see people come together and fight for equity. It's been affirming to see our world come together and work for change. Additionally, seeing companies come to us and tell us, we know we need to do better. It's made us proud. And as Black female founders of a tech company that's designed to be a solution to systemic racism in the workplace, we have been encouraged to see the outpouring of support for the Black community over the past few weeks.
We know that the work we're doing at Canaries is important, and we're extremely motivated by the attention that's being brought to racism. But let's be clear, companies releasing Black Lives Matter statements is not enough. Companies have to use times like these as a catalyst for change. Now is the time for business leaders to ensure that their organizations are diverse, equitable, and inclusive, with a specific focus on the Black employee experience. Canaries can guide companies who are committed to the Black Lives Matter movement and to prioritizing workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion through this pivotal time in history.
And we help companies do this by turning DEI into hard data and ensuring that it's a measurable key performance indicator, or KPI, that can easily be tracked and improved. Most companies' success is translated into numbers, so DEI should be treated the same. C-suite executives who often base success off of data and KPIs, they'll now have the same numerical data for the success of their diversity and inclusion efforts. And at Canaries, we provide those executives with the data and the analytics they need to track this important KPI.
We provide two primary solutions to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. For companies, We know that the lack of measuring DEI prevents them from tracking progress and holding themselves accountable for such efforts. As such, through our partnership with companies, we customize and deploy assessments that measure inclusion and equity in an organization. And our technology analyzes the data collected to provide insights so we can assist them in cultivating an informed DEI strategy. We are big believers that the data and analytics can help diagnose any issues like an X-ray, and only with such X-rays can DEI strategies be implemented that are specifically tailored for an organization.
We also have a solution for employees designed to encourage transparency. We know that the lack of transparency in DEI is one of the reasons we're still talking about the stagnant progress in DEI. We created canaries.com, where employees can visit to gather DEI-related information about specific employers, and they can anonymously share their lived workplace experiences to create a call to action for their employers, and to provide information to prospective employees about what it's like to work at a certain employer as a person of color. Many employees are feeling lost, sad, and frustrated with their organizations because they may have not released a statement about BLM, or they did, but those employees did not see any change in their workplace. Canaries gives these employees a voice to speak up and create change within their workplace without that fear of retaliation. Canaries allows employees to stay completely anonymous while speaking up for themselves.
As we have the opportunity to talk to many companies about their DEI journey, some of the initial steps we talk through with them on how they should start their DEI journey include asking a few questions. A first question to consider is your employee makeup and leadership reflective of the world around us? Representation and inclusion matter, and we should take steps to hire and promote employees no matter their background at every level of the organization, including the C-suite and board. Second, is your organization equitable? Companies should take a deep look at their policies, procedures, benefits, and pay scales to ensure they support every employee in an equitable way.
And companies need to ask themselves, are we really inclusive? Companies need to look at their inclusion efforts. Inclusion means supporting and accepting every employee for who they are and making employees feel like they belong. Oftentimes, inclusion is the most difficult thing to measure. But that's exactly what Canaries does. We measure inclusion within a company, and we benchmark it so a company can know how they're doing with inclusion over time. Now, all this might sound a little simple, but inclusion must be intentional for it to be meaningful and for it to make an impact. And we hope to see companies step up, create change from within, leading to a more diverse and inclusive society overall. This is not just about one company's D&I efforts. This is our collective effort as a country, as a society, and now's the time to determine what type of nation do we want to be. We know that if gender parity was achieved, the poverty rate would be lowered by 50%.
We also know that Black Americans are not treated fairly in almost every aspect of our society. 62% of Black employees in science, engineering, and technology industries report experiencing discrimination at work. Even if they have the same education level, African Americans with college degrees are 2 times as likely to be unemployed as white graduates. These issues are a stark reality for millions of people in this country, and this problem can be partially attributed to how companies approach DEI.
We really hope that the work we're doing at Canaries will lead to a world where employees are treated fairly and employers prioritize that fair treatment. We want to see a world where the next generation feels empowered and included to be themselves in the workplace. And on a personal note, Mandy and I are both mothers. We just want to see a world where our children can enter the workplace and they enter a much more equitable and inclusive workplace. And I just really hope that we can be part of that change.
That's why we're so excited about our partnership with the Black Idea Coalition, which will further enable us to create equitable workplaces for Black employees. And through the coalition, help companies and other institutions create more equitable and inclusive workplaces.
We are so looking forward to doing this partnership and collectively making real change in the corporate world, which will ultimately lead to an overall more just society. Thank you all for letting us speak to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandy. And we're deeply excited about the partnership that we've developed between Black Idea and Canaries. And again, we're excited about already seeing what's coming from that partnership. If you're like me, you are enthused, excited, and animated, ready to get to work. And that's why we named this the Black Idea Coalition, because it's inclusion, diversity, equity in action. And so now is the time to take action. Here's what I want you to do. If you're an individual who wants to be a part of this movement, we need your support. We need you to join in. Go to our website and just click the Join tab. And we want to capture information so that as we're scaling, as we're growing, and as we are holding companies accountable, we'll need you to build out our network and to help to bring attention to issues that are relevant and issues that will impact the life of Black business world. And so please make sure you connect with us. But also, if you represent an organization that is doing the work of trying to develop capacity in the DEI space. Maybe you are an educational institution, or maybe you're a private equity firm, maybe you're a company, and you want to be a part of this ecosystem, this space where business is being transacted. We've already seen a number of new relationships that have developed and are going to be profitable for those who are involved. We want to be a part of that ecosystem too. And so if you're a business leader, if you're a business owner, if you are anywhere a part of the Deal Flow platform, we want to encourage you to indicate that on the form as well. And then finally, if you're an institution that recognizes you need some help in this D&I space, you want to get your diversity and equity and inclusion game right, you want to make sure that you have the benefit of the partners that are part of the coalition. So please make sure that you indicate that as well. Join, help others to join in. Let them know that this is the place that's going to make a difference in the world and in the Black business world as we continue to build equity and to build one another up. So grateful for all those who've been serving and working with us, and we're getting excited because we know that better things are on the horizon. So glad to welcome to the platform now Mr. Spencer Overton, who is the president of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, which is the Black think tank. It actually is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, and Spencer is leading this organization into new territory as policy is having profound impacts on our country, on our culture, certainly on our economy. And the Joint Center has been around for half a decade and providing research and leading in advocacy campaigns and helping us to understand what will transpire and how we should be best positioned, and how policy, both at the state, federal, as well as the local levels, impact the lives of African Americans. And so they are one of our organizational partners and operational partners. They're helping us to shape, identify issues that we need to have greater impact on, have greater access to. And so very grateful that he has chosen to lend of his very valuable time, as well as to provide resources from the organization, so that as we align our common cause, we might be able to scale and provide others the opportunity to engage in this vital work. We want more persons who are engaged in policy advocacy. Everybody knows somebody that can make a call to a congressperson, and don't discount the impact of those calls. But first, you have to understand the policies, you have to know the nuances, and just as all of us have day jobs and are busy, this is the role that think tanks play. They provide the research, then the data. They do the deep dives into the nooks and crannies of the policies, those hidden things that were written in there to provide particular advantages or disadvantages. These are the people who do the vital work of finding those things, calling to our attention, and helping us to write them. And so we're very grateful to have the Joint Center on as a partner. And as you listen to Mr. Overton, I think you'll know why we're so excited about this partnership.
My name is Spencer Overton. I'm excited about the future of the Black Idea Coalition. I'm the president of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, which is America's Black think tank. We produce data, analysis, ideas, and solutions on the future of work in Black communities, on Black businesses, on the economic impact of the pandemic on Black communities, check us out at jointcenter.org. Now, I know from our research that our nation faces major racial equity challenges ahead. But I'm inspired because the Joint Center is a part of the Black Idea Coalition. This is a critical moment in our nation's history. Yes, we've got to deal with police reform and criminal justice reform, but we can't stop there. We've got to address systemic inequality and economics that has plagued us throughout our history and has only been exacerbated by the pandemic. Many Black workers fell into one of two categories during the pandemic. They either lost their job and faced economic insecurity due to a loss of income, or they were deemed an essential worker and faced insecurity due to increased risk of exposure to the virus. In April, Black unemployment spiked to 16.7%. That's almost 11 percentage points higher than the pre-pandemic rates. The most recent data show that Black unemployment is still about 5 points higher than average. Key economists project that 32% of those pandemic-induced layoffs will be permanent. In other words, these jobs aren't coming back, right? Of frontline workers that were deemed essential and still working during the pandemic, about 1 in 6 of those were Black workers. Right? Black workers are overrepresented as cashiers, which was listed as the job most at risk to contact with the virus, that has low pay and low benefits. Black businesses have also been hit hard by the pandemic. From February to April of this year, 41% of businesses closed that were Black. So 41% of Black businesses closed, right? So while recent data show a partial rebound, a greater share of Black businesses remain closed compared to other businesses. Now, some suggest that skills and credentials explain economic opportunity, and if we just reduce the so-called performance gap or achievement gap, we'll reduce racial economic disparities. Now granted, credentials are important. 99% of the over 11 million jobs created after the 2008 recession went to workers with some college education. But while credentials, skills, and education are critically important, other factors, other systemic factors, also shape the opportunities of Black communities. For example, a foundational study showed that a resume with a white name is 50% more likely to receive a callback than an identical resume with an African-American name, right? A more recent study showed that African-American job applicants who whiten their resumes by scrubbing them of all racial clues are 2.5 times more likely to get a job callback. A third study showed that white households headed by someone without a high school diploma have more wealth on average than Black households headed by someone with a college degree. So even if Black folks had equal or superior skills and credentials, disparities would still exist. So in addition to focusing on skills, education, and credentials, which are important, we need to focus on other systemic factors. And just to be clear, this is not just a Black problem. This is an American problem. Eliminating racial disparities would translate into an additional $2.7 trillion per year in US GDP, according to the Kellogg Foundation, or a 13% boost in our GDP. This would mean more customers for businesses, more taxpayers to contribute to our collective obligations, and more innovation and creativity to ensure America leads the world in the new economy. Unlike our history, the future economy cannot be based on low-cost or no-cost Black labor. Our future economy has to be based on cultivating and developing the talents of all Americans. Now, I'm particularly excited about the Black Idea Coalition's focus on the Black inclusivity model, which centers Black communities. Too often we haven't centered Black communities. For example, the GI Bill is touted as creating the middle class, right? But the GI Bill also widened racial disparities in wealth because Black veterans couldn't fully take advantage of its benefits. They couldn't take advantage of the tuition benefit because of exclusionary policies of American colleges and universities. Black veterans couldn't take advantage of the GI Bill's mortgage guarantee benefit because of racially restrictive housing covenants and redlining. So even though the GI Bill itself was race neutral, because Black communities were not at the center of the design of the GI Bill did not lift all boats. In fact, it widened racial disparities. The Black Idea Coalition is also essential because it focuses on Black employment, investment, and contracting. While we certainly need good public policies to address systemic inequality, the private sector also plays a key role. Fortune 500 companies alone represent 2/3 of the GDP in the US, and their decisions play a big role in whether disparities increase or are eliminated. Also, I'm excited about the Black Idea Coalition's strategic partnerships. None of us can do it alone. We all have a role to play in the ecosystem of inclusion. The Joint Center is America's Black think tank, but we can't fully realize our potential without strong partnerships with the Executive Leadership Council, the National Society of Black Engineers, community development financial institutions, private sector companies, community organizations, foundations, and many others. And these partnerships, they're key because there are no easy answers. There is no silver bullet solution. The challenges that confront us are over 400 years old, and they form the foundation of the initial rise of the US as a global economic superpower in the early 1800s until today. That's why we need research from the Joint Center and others, but we also need solutions, training, legal support, pipeline development, advocacy, and public engagement from many others in the Black Idea Coalition. Finally, as a leader of a research institution, I believe in the old adage that we can't manage what we can't measure. Our success has to be defined and then tracked with real data. The Black Idea Coalition has a commitment to collecting real data about progress in individual companies, but also in our broader economy, and linking it to financial results. And so I'm excited that the Joint Center is a part of the Black Idea Coalition. We also look forward to partnering with many others to ensure that there's a seat at the table for everyone, that we close the pay gap, and that we fully develop the talents of all people in the United States. Thanks.
Good afternoon. First, I would like to thank the Black Idea Coalition for having this very important, candid, necessary, and national conversation around Black inclusion and equity to fulfill the promise of achieving Black parity in employment, investments, and contracting. I am here on behalf of my firm, Holland & Knight, an international corporate law firm that is committed to bringing about diversity and inclusion internally and extending support outside our walls to organizations like the Black Idea Coalition, which will bridge the gaps that we see not only within the legal community, but across most, if not all, industry sectors. We recognize this work is not easy, but it is necessary, and the only way to have a significant impact is for us to be engaged. We are proud to be one of the initial strategic partners to provide our legal services as well as networks and relationships, which includes consultancy, legal support, and advocacy. We will provide DEI guidance to the coalition organizations that are working to figure this out. Additionally, we need to look at this from a holistic perspective, and we plan to help advocate for legislation that has an economic impact on our communities, from affordable housing, transportation, investment in small and minority-owned businesses, to tax policy and programs that help to uplift urban communities. We will provide the transactional work on behalf of the coalition in helping to shape the partnerships. We realize in order for this work to be done, the organization has to be strong. Historically, we know the legal profession has had its own set of issues in developing a diverse pipeline, as well as retaining talented individuals. We recognize there has to be systematic, obtainable solutions, and we are excited to be a partner in this effort. It's so important to think big and to bring together like-minded individuals to discuss ideas that move us closer to fulfilling the promise of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our firm started a series internally called Courageous Conversations that has helped us to establish a compass to engage, sustain, and deepen our dialogue around racial disparities and how we break down cultural barriers and structures that impede progress. I believe that is exactly what the Black Idea Coalition is designed to do, to be the compass related to these issues of economic parity. It is our hope to gain additional allies and empower organizations to take immediate action and provide them with clear rules of engagement. If your organization doesn't quite know where to begin, the Black Idea Coalition is here to help in figuring out what your plan of action should be and to hold stakeholders accountable. I am encouraged by the level of investment and brainpower that is at the table day one and can't wait to see the other allies that will be sure to join us. It is critical for organizations to provide tools to tear down calcified cultures that have been designed to isolate and discourage diverse thought and ideas and economic liberation. I recently took a certification course in diversity and inclusion at Cornell in order to be well equipped with the tools to provide leadership in this area within organizations that I serve, whether it be a board position, a volunteer organization that I am a member of, or within my own workplace. We all can play a part in advancing the ball. It will take a collective effort. As an African American woman federal lobbyist, I see very few women in Washington that look like me. And for this reason, we have created an organization called Black Girl Magic that builds the pipeline for women that are interested in our profession, as well as provide a community of support to ensure we are successful at our jobs. We also support African American women who are running for office that are inclined to advocate for issues that are important to us. I commend the work of the Joint Center in this area, which I am happy to see is a strategic partner with the coalition. They have helped to make significant strides in the hiring practices on the Hill to ensure there are more people of color being hired in senior level positions. Organizations like the Washington Heads of Office, led by Molly Ryan and Brad Knox. This organization is investing in future leaders by designing leadership boot camps and cohorts for African American lobbyists, so when positions are available for new heads of office in DC, we have strong candidates that can be considered. These are examples of individuals using their resources, platforms, and intellect to determine how we use our influence as government affairs executives to affect change in our companies and government. As a colleague of mine recently said, it is imperative that we take ownership individually, collectively, and institutionally. These examples are doing just that. And taking ownership and engaging, we look forward to working with the Black Idea Coalition, and we look forward to you engaging to ensure that African Americans can fully participate in our economic system to provide stability for their families, businesses, and communities. Thank you for having me, and we look forward to being engaged in such an important initiative.
Many congratulations to Pastor Matthew Watley and the entire team that has pulled off the launch of the Black Idea Coalition. I'm proud to be part of the kickoff summit and honored to be asked to offer some brief remarks. Enterprise Community Partners was born out of an encounter in 1973 when 3 women at the Church of the Savior in Washington, D.C. wanted to buy 2 buildings and fix them up and preserve them for low-income people. Successful real estate developer Jim Rouse told the ladies the deal didn't pencil out. Undeterred, they raised and put down a non-refundable deposit on the buildings and asked him, "Now what are you willing to do?" Underwriting said no. Conventional norms said no. But faith with work said yes. Out of that encounter was born in 1982 the social enterprise now known as Enterprise Community Partners. Originally started with a simple yet profound premise: work until everyone has a safe, healthy, and affordable place to call home. Today in 2020, we can look back at over $45 billion invested of debt and equity capital supporting over 585,000 homes and community facilities, many of them affordable for low-income Americans. Our new strategic plan has us still working to increase the supply of affordable housing for low-income households. We also look to ground our work in racial equity and work for economic mobility and resilience for people and communities. We do this as a national organization with a proven track record, bringing to bear an end-to-end platform that allows us to bring financing capital, federal, state, and local policy interventions, programmatic and systems change interventions across the country, as well as providing nearly 13,000 affordable housing opportunities directly as an owner-operator in the Mid-Atlantic region. Our work is about people and opportunity, enhancing the quality of people's lives by making sure they have an affordable place to live in a community connected to opportunities. We will be a platform for the development and deployment of capital for housing and community development efforts, for policy work and discussions of equitable talent placement efforts. We look forward to collaborating with the Black Idea Coalition because we know far too many people of color, especially Black people, have been systematically denied the same opportunities as other Americans. The denial of opportunity has played out in many walks of life. We know that is particularly true with real estate and community development. Whether it was denial of abilities to secure mortgages for homes, having substandard rental housing or unaffordable rental options, or having communities cleared out with highways run right through them. The ability to have a safe and affordable home connected to opportunities that allow people to realize their potential and dreams is still far too often elusive for Black people. There is much attention being placed on the issue of racial equity. The issues of racism and discrimination are not new, but the level of discourse and attention has certainly heightened in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others, along with the glaring disproportionate impacts COVID-19 is having on Black and brown people. There are three quick points that I will raise. First, so what, now what? This was a question I raised after Enterprise hosted Designing the We's Undesign the Red Line exhibit in Baltimore, Columbia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. several years ago. So what, now what? After the exhibits, after the panel conversations and dialogues, after some are made aware for the first time and others reminded of the ills and evils, what next? After the speeches and demonstrations and protests and t-shirts and tweets and videos and conferences, what next? After Rodney King and Trayvon Martin, after Freddie Gray and Tamir Rice, after Alton Sterling and Eric Garner, after the Kerner Commission says in 1968, white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it. The nation so divided that the United States poised to fracture into two radically unequal societies, one Black, one white. So what? Now what? We must continue to ask ourselves after moments of clarity happen, when society is reminded yet again of just how real some situations are. After those moments, we must ask ourselves and provide an answer to what we will do next to bring meaningful, lasting change. Secondly, we gotta lay deep roots. Ossie Davis said to the first Congressional Black Caucus dinner, "It's not the man, it's the plan." In 2020, I'd add to these wise words, it's not the man, it's the plan. And that plan has to be hardwired into the code. What does that mean? It means we must resource the plans with money and people and systems. It means we must implement the plan and track the effectiveness of the plan's implementation and adapt the plan as needed and retool and implement more and wash, rinse, and repeat. Building it into the code means that our quest for racial equity in America, our efforts in particular to bridge gaps between white and Blacks, must be hardwired into the system. It is why the work of the Black Idea Coalition is so important. Whatever the issue is, equity in mortgage lending, development without displacement, policing, healthcare, access to capital for business owners, equitable hiring, retention and promotion, education, whatever the field. Our plan must include changes to systems and standard operating procedures and evaluation such that equity is not a thing over there or an isolated department with little budget and less power. Equity, the mandate for it, the process of obtaining it, the evaluation of whether we are doing enough to reach it must be wired into the code. It is just what we do. It is part of the mechanisms of being for any government, any company, any organization, and even families and individuals. Regardless of who the president or governor or mayor or CEO or pastor is, it is just what we do and who we are. It is institutionalizing the beloved community, justice incarnate in the very systems of our lives. Finally, let me encourage a greeting, a mantra, a call to action that is a flip of an all too frequent tragic utterance that we have heard: still breathing. We have heard men being killed at the hands of the state utter the words, "I can't breathe." Understandably so, the words have been a rallying cry and call to action. We have seen them on t-shirts and chanted at rallies. But today, I encourage us not to forget those words and the tragedy they represent, but simply to consider this: when asked, "How you doing?" respond, "Still breathing." When our alarm goes off in the morning to wake us up, take a deep breath in of the Ruah, the animating breath of life, and utter, "Still breathing." When we enter into conversations with CEOs and senior staff or boards of our companies about how to establish or expand meaningful impact in the racial equity space with real performance targets and evaluation, knowing there may be objections rooted in ignorance or apathy at best, avarice and enmity at worst, pause and say to ourselves before beginning the dialogue or sending the note, "Still breathing." Still breathing reminds us that we have been blessed with life, and with that blessing comes responsibility to work for justice. It may mean working on our actual job like John Lewis and Ruth Bader Ginsburg until the day we die. Or if we're retired from the place of employment, but knowing that we must still be engaged on the field of labor for justice. Still breathing signals to our friends and our family that we get it, and they should too, that there is still a call to get at it. And to those that wish us ill, politicians, business leaders, folks on the street who would do us harm, who would deprive us of life with a knee on our neck, or deprive us of opportunity by closing us out of hiring or contracting processes, or deny us a loan we qualify for, or the equitable care all deserve but don't get from medical professionals, still breathing tells them, "I'm still here. You may have got my father, my mother, my sister, my brother, but I'm still here. You got George Floyd, but we're still here, still breathing." Legendary Grambling State football coach Eddie Robinson told his team once, the first time that ball is snapped, you got to knock hell out of him and let him know one thing, that, boy, you're going to be in trouble this evening. You got a good man in front of you. We'll stay nonviolent in our approach, but knock the proverbial hell out of systems and structures by the work of the Black Idea Coalition and partners like Enterprise. Replace that hell with a piece of the justice of heaven, with systems and approaches and opportunities that further equity for Black people across the nation. And just like with the 3 women in 1973, our faith, which works, will leave a legacy. God bless and thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here to share a little bit more about the Gallup Center on Black Voices. Quickly, some introduction. My name is Camille Lloyd. I serve as the director for the Gallup Center on Black Voices, and also as a senior consultant here at Gallup, leading our work in organizational development, leadership development, and organizational effectiveness for our federal government practice.
And my name is Kapo Mamalu. I am the Associate Director of the Gallup Center on Black Voices. And my role within the center is to really bring our mission to life. I am also a senior consultant at Gallup, where I have a diverse clientele base, really focused around change management, and really emphasize in building inclusive teams. And so with that, Gallup has made this 100-year commitment devoted to studying and understanding the Black experience in America. This is really Gallup's, as an institute, ways they wanted to contribute through our mission to change what's going on within our country. So it was really important for us to show up in an authentic way, similar to the way how we execute our mission through our research, analytics, and advice.
Thank you, Kapo. So we'll look a little bit more on how are we operationalizing our mission at the center. As Kapo mentioned, Gallup as an organization and thinking about how we can lend our mission and purpose to the work that is needed in terms of creating equity in our society. As part of that process, we examined the limitations in the way research is done on the Black experience, or how research is done that looks to understand Black experiences. And what we did find are some key limitations that, with the onset of our work, is something that we wanted to ensure that the work of the center will address. The first of that one is this idea that you can capture the Black experience with an oversample in a national type survey, and that would be sufficient in terms of creating the understanding that's needed to determine the pathologies of pain that exist as a result of systemic racism, exclusion, and oppression. And so it is our goal, the way we will carry out the work at the center, is to do it at a scale and a magnitude that allows for us to unpack the different experiences of Black Americans across the different intersectionalities. And so it would include a depth of subgroup analysis within the Black community, whether that's by gender, by age, by geography. And that's really truly trying to understand what is that experience, and where does it differ? And so that's one way that we are hoping in terms of changing and addressing some of those limitations. The second limitation, and Kapo hinted to this when she mentioned that this is Gallup's 100-year commitment to studying, reporting, and highlighting the Black experience. And we were deliberate in saying that this is a 100-year commitment because Gallup is not new to studying race relations. We've actually studied race relations since the 1930s. But what we did realize is that research on a large scale tend to be cyclical or event-based. And so we knew that the work that we will do, we would have to do it in a sustainable way. And when we say sustainable, it's really just a sustained effort to ensuring that we're constantly measuring and tracking life experiences for Black America. And what we'll do with that is, for the next 100 years, we are planning to develop what we're calling our Sustainable Development Goals. And these are measures in 6 key research pillars, and those research pillars are justice, economics, education, jobs and work, health and well-being, and community and environment. And it is our goal through our work at the center and in partnership with research advisors, and these are individuals who have devoted their lives and their careers to studying equity and understanding the impact of racism, oppression, and exclusion in terms of Black Americans' ability to achieve equitable life outcomes, to come up with a set of measures that we will track on a quarterly basis. And the goal for these measures is that the measures self-reported to really how people's lives are going, and that they are complementary to the existing macro measures that we have. We feel like it's important to ensure that we have a self-report measure that is responsive to how people's lives are going. And so if as a society we are in good times and we're experiencing a period of growth, that we understand how does that manifest itself in everyday Black Americans' lives. What does that look like? What does that look like for Black Americans' ability to achieve equitable life outcomes? And how does it compare to what we know from these other macro measures as a society or as a larger economy, if it's an economic measure? And so it's really kind of having this right synergy between the existing historical macro measures and having a measure that's nimble enough to capture the nuances that is happening in terms of changes in people's lives and their ability to, get a fair share, a fair shake, or their ability to feel like they can be optimistic and hopeful for the future. And so the goal is that these measures that we will develop across these 6 research pillars will allow us the ability to do that. So at any given point in time, across any of the pillars, we can say, well, what is the Black experience, or what is the state of Black America as it relates to X? And so I'll talk a little bit more about how the measures across each of those 6 key research pillars will be focused, and how we're hoping to develop research and put out research across these 6 pillars in a way that truly give insights to understanding, how we can quantify the disparities for Black Americans across these 6 areas, but really also understanding from individuals themselves as to where they're looking for solutions in their lives in terms of these 6 key research areas. We take, for instance, the pillar on justice. We recently released some data in terms of people's experiences with law enforcement, but it's much more than that. It's understanding and unpacking the inequities in the process, right? So these are the processes by which law is created, how it's implemented, and how it's enforced in our communities across the country. One of the things is also looking at what racial disparities look like in terms of representations of peoples and communities, but how do these manifest themselves in people's lives in terms of creating barriers for their abilities to achieve equitable life outcomes? And that's really kind of that experiential piece that we're hoping will provide a different lens in terms of how we do research across these areas and how we do research on the Black experience in general, which is really focused on amplifying Black voices so we can elevate these findings into the conversations that are being had around solutions, and where people are experiencing, people are expecting solutions to impact those experiences, so that we can create the change that's needed in our society towards, making the necessary adjustments towards achieving equity. When you think about, for instance, our next pillar that we're focusing on and developing some research around is jobs and work. And what we're doing in this pillar is really unpacking the disparities in employment, and that will take a look at what access to quality job looks like for Black Americans and career paths, but also when it comes to development of job relevant skills, recruitment and selection processes, how does systemic racism, oppression, and exclusion manifests itself in terms of creating these barriers towards equitable access for Black Americans in a research pillar such as jobs and work. We'll also unpack what that employee experience is like. How does it, how are employee experiencing their organizations as a function of race and race relations? What does that look like in terms of differences in opportunities for development and advancement for Black employees or Black workers? And what does that look like? What are those organizational policies and procedures that people report in terms of their daily experiences and their work cultures that they are creating barriers for them in terms of their ability to, be successful and ultimately achieve what their life's goals are through the work that they do or the jobs that they have. Another important thing to note about these research pillars is that these are all our priority areas, so there's no order of priority. We will focus intently on these 6 key areas because through our research, we know that when it comes to having an opportunity to have a life well lived, the different intersections between these 6 pillars is really understanding where opportunity and access lies within these 6 areas is really what creates the ability for individuals in our country to have a life well lived. One of the things that is important for us at the center is not that we are this incubator of discoveries and ideas and it just sits there, but it's really about elevating these findings into those conversations for decision making. So it is the voice of these individuals who are having these lived experiences that are contributing to those discussions around solutions. It's one thing to disagree on what the solution is, but being able to quantify what that experience is going to be important in terms of setting the right premise when it comes to prioritization of policy or prioritization of resources, because one thing we are interested in, what we will continue to do through the center's work, is really asking people when they're expecting for change when it comes towards giving them a break or getting that opportunity, where they're expecting it for each of these 6 areas in their lives. And so the idea is to amplify these voices into those conversations, so Black Americans no longer become the group that is most talked about but least heard from. And so it is important that we partner with organizations and individuals who are on the ground doing the work. Gallup certainly wants to make sure that this research gets out there and get in the hands of those who need it in terms of their decision-making processes. And so when it comes to having access to data, Gallup will create data dashboards that this data become publicly available for individuals who are truly trying to get an understanding of where are those pathologies of pains and where are people looking for solution for their lives.
Well, good afternoon, and we're so excited for you to continue to stay with us for this important summit as we continue to work to bring equity in the business world, trying to bring parity, investment, and contracting and employment. Certainly during this time, we wanted to widen the conversation. You've heard from a lot of our partners, you've heard from a lot of thought leaders, but we actually wanted to talk to some people who are boots on the ground doing the work and have been doing so for a long time. And so I'm so glad to welcome to the platform Ms. Natalie Robinson, who is with CBS and has done great work with them down through the years, particularly as it relates to increasing diversity in their supply chain. You all know that CBS is the largest watched network. And so many of us don't tend to think when we turn on the television about the number of businesses that are actually doing transactions with the company and the businesses that are and are not. And so I'm very interested to hear her take on that sector of the world and to get her advice as to how we can move forward. Natalie, good afternoon.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks so much. And we're also glad to welcome Bernard Coleman, who is with Gusto, who's over their entire employee engagement. And just like Natalie, you may have been touched by his company without even knowing it or appreciating it. We're certainly appreciative of his expertise as well. Before Gusto, he was with Uber, and he has led the diversity conversation, not simply in those companies, but in a larger role around the country. And so we're especially excited to hear from him as well. Brother Bernard, welcome as well.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And we're so excited. I want to jump right into it. I want to start off by talking about sort of this moment in time, right? So we recognize that since the mass protests, not just around the country, but around the world, in the wake of the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, that there has been a shift in corporate America, not simply to focus on justice as it relates to policing, but also around a renewed seeming interest around equity, inclusion, and diversity in business. And we've seen a number of corporations pledge, some in the billions, some in the millions, whether those are all right sized for each of those particular companies or not. At least there has been an effort. And one of the reasons that we're here around the Black Idea is because we started to recognize, how do those dollars actually find end users? Where does that transaction occur? It's one thing to have an interest in investing in our community or increasing Black employment, but are those pipelines established? Is there a platform where the larger corporate culture and groupings are able to connect with the Black business world? And so I wanted to have you all speak from your particular vantage points about how you see this moment and how do you see us going forward in business?
Okay, I'll start. Just for a moment of clarity, I'm no longer with CBS.
Oh, sorry.
No, not a problem. I actually separated during this civil unrest. I separated in May, and just being in this moment of change, it really, really spoke to me in terms of what organizations do I want to, commit to that are actually genuinely and authentically committed to the movement. Not saying that CBS wasn't, but I felt like this is a time to actually pivot into diversity and inclusion. So my background is supply chain, but just being in this moment of impact, I felt like we really needed to focus on the people and the workforce and the culture and the communities that we serve. And like you said, I noticed that all of these organizations are pledging millions of dollars to D&I efforts due to the civil unrest. But what we really need to pay attention to is there any strategy behind these dollars that are actually pledged? Are they hiring headcount? Are they providing resources to actually drive these strategies? Because if you go online, you'll see there's tons of jobs for D&I leaders. But is it just a knee-jerk reaction, or do they really have the resources, the funding, the technology to actually support these pledges? So I do feel like this had to happen for us to see action. But right now the iron is hot, and I feel like we need to take advantage of it as people of color, as small businesses, and actually hold these organizations accountable to these pledges. Because once this kind of fades, which unfortunately it will fade, the momentum will be lost. So I think it's very important to pay attention to the organizations that are actually hiring leaders, that are putting strategies and programs in place, and those that we can actually see results from these pledges. Because it could just be lip service.
You've put so much on the table already. One, I think it's extremely important that there is some level of accountability. And that's part of what we're doing, is creating a public platform where the masses can engage and create that level of accountability, so that we don't just see the checking of a box to say, okay, we responded to this moment. I do think that moments happen, moments certainly pass, but I think that in their wake, there can be shifts that last. And so my hope is that this is a shift, but I think in order for it to truly be a shift, we have to put, as you said, some infrastructure in place around measurement and accountability. So let me just dive one more level with you. In terms of your experience with supply chain, talk to me about some of the challenges you've seen with minority and Black-owned businesses who are trying to take that next step up. What are some of the structural challenges that you've sort of had to encounter? You met somebody and said, hey, listen, we want to work with you all, and you followed up, and then you started to see this pattern. Talk to me about the pattern.
Well, as supplier diversity leaders, we are the gatekeeper to actually get in to do business with our organization. And just going through like all the vendors that reach out to us, we really want to make sure that they're prepared and positioned to partner with us. So, I mean, I have seen some companies that, their website is down, or their, capability statement isn't clear, or their documents are in order. So I do feel like development is just an ongoing thing. So I do encourage diverse-owned businesses to work with their chambers of commerce and these certification organizations to get their ducks in a row. Because a lot of times we have to encourage our stakeholders to partner with a diverse-owned business. And when we bring them to the table, we want to make sure they're positioned to partner with a large organization such as a CBS or a Disney or just a major media network. So what I've been seeing, and there are some great minority-owned businesses that are thriving with these major corporations. And I think the ones that are coming up behind them, they need to pay attention to those large minority businesses that are doing well, that have partnered with a CBS or a large corporation. So what I do encourage these up and coming small businesses that want to contract with a large corporation is to make sure that they have all of their ducks in a row. And there are plenty of resources through the Small Business Administration, through the Minority Certification Organization. There are so many resources out there. And so I encourage them to do their research and take all these free webinars, all these free programs. There are tons of resources to assist them, to position them to do business with us. Right. And once you make these contacts, follow up. Persistence and consistency. That is one way to stay on the radar. I mean, as a leader, It kind of does get on our nerves, but we understand that this is, if you're not working, you're not eating. So we want to support these small business and stay on their radar, make these connections on LinkedIn and form these partnerships. So once it's time to go in and pitch to our stakeholders, you are ready and there's no questions asked.
Absolutely. Keep yourself in the game and don't take yourself out of the game by making unforced errors. Very good.
That's right.
And Brother Bernard, so glad to have you. And shout out to Bernard. He really has made a sacrifice because he's 3 hours behind everybody else. So glad to see you on today. Talk to me from your vantage point and your experience about some of the challenges that you've seen and experienced in trying to be an advocate for diversity. And how do you frame this moment where we are as a country and also in our corporate culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. Building off of what Natalie said, when you look at where we are as a country, I thought a lot about George Floyd's murder and what it meant. How should we be showing up? And just thinking deeply, what is happening right now? And the only time I could look back to would be 1968, because you try to look at a moment in time to understand how should you show up now in present day. And that's the time that seems most similar in terms of when you think about conditions going on in the world. And so in thinking about that moment, it's almost like people are finally starting to pay attention. And what are you going to do with that moment? And I think it comes down fundamentally to, it can't be performative. We do see a lot of corporations coming out and saying we're pledging this and we're pledging that, but with little or no accountability, because we don't know what's going on in the inner workings of the company. We don't know if they're even going to stick with the things that they've pledged outwardly. So I think it really comes down to understanding what is their plan, because Natalie laid it out there. Like, this is a moment that's going to close. If we don't go for it now, is it going to be another 50 years? And we're having another reckoning. So I think what it comes down to is making sure that companies have a holistic plan, not just performative things that we see outwardly, but it needs to be like, what's your employee plan? What's your supplier diversity plan? It should be systemic things that they're doing to improve those conditions. And it needs to be multi-year. It just can't be, we gave money to the NAACP, which is wonderful, but we need to see more than that. So it needs to be resources, it needs to be staff, it needs to be commitment up and down the organization at all levels. I mean, not just entry level, but we're talking about leaders. It needs to be multi-year, because it took us many, many years to get to this place. So you can't have an easy button that will allow us to be right out of it in one moment. And it needs to be prioritized and checkpoints throughout the year. So I think the way that's achieved is like not only internally, but you do staffing. And if you have the multi-year plan with multi-year check-ins, you can see progressive actions that are occurring, and that you can kind of check and see how those folks are doing. Because I would love to see a year from now, all the folks who said, let's celebrate Juneteenth, or let's do this. Let's come back a year from now and check in, 2 years from now and check in and see how you're doing in terms of progress. Because I think without that critical accountability, we will be running in place, and the moment would be squandered, which would be incredibly sad, because I don't think anybody wants to go through this again and see this level of unrest without a proper answer.
I think that's perfectly framed. For me, I think it is all about accountability. That's the word that just seems to be coming back again and again. And you all know that when a corporation makes up its mind to do something, usually the press release is the very last thing that it does. And when it's going to expand into a new market, when it's going to expand into a new business, it does research. It does puts all kinds of resources in place. It lines up capital. It recruits best talent. It gets ready, hoping that because the moment demanded a statement, that's what drove these companies to make these statements so quickly, and we were appreciative of that. But we also recognize that there are some standard markers for when corporations are serious about doing something, how they go about doing that. And you can sort of look into the tea leaves and see. And so as we move forward, and that's why, again, this organization we think is right-sized for the right moment, because with all the resources that are available, there doesn't seem to be a clearinghouse where the larger corporate world knows how to get to because there's been such a great divide. And Bernard, I'd be interested to hear about some of the challenges you've seen in terms of pipeline for talent, development, recruitment, retention. We've recognized right now the article that came out in the journal about a month and a half ago that talked about the turnover in CDOs because these persons were hired with this, assignment to bring diversity and realized that they had no locus of authority to do so. And folks got burned out, folks got tired. And so talk to me about, from your perspective experience, what that looked like.
Yeah, that one's near and dear to my heart because obviously you monitor and see, like you're talking to peers, you're trying to share information as to how you can best use tactics and techniques to better your organization. And just as a cursory look at the landscape, you see a lot of folks getting burnt out because they come in with no locus of control. They come in, what's the budget? Oh, we don't have one. What's the team? You're it. And you're expected to shift heaven and earth and fix that company's missteps and problems that you just inherited. And so even if you just think about that from a fundamental perspective, you're not setting that person up for success, yet you're expecting the world. And so again, it kind of goes back to that accountability. You need to be, you talked about prioritizing things. You'd have staff and have research, and you've gone through a certain protocols and controls to ensure that if this is something that's important to us, let's put the resources behind it, let's do the research and ensure that it happens. So I think what needs to first happen is as DE&I professionals, you need to ask those questions coming in the door, like, is this a company in crisis? Just what exactly is going on? Understand the totality of what you're about to experience. And then also make those demands like, look, if this is a priority, these are the following things I'm going to need if I'm going to be successful here. Because I think just as much as if you are a D&I professional going for that role, you need to really understand what you're inheriting. As a cautionary tale, I've seen many folks, it's the exciting moment to step into this big role, and they're basically doomed from the very start. So I think along with asking for budget, where's that leadership buy-in? Are the leaders aligned? It just can't be entry-level folks helping you push the agenda that you have going on. Like, are the leaders aligned? Are the middle managers aligned? Are the entry-level folks aligned? Do they have employer resource groups? Do they have a board that's diverse? You have to look at every level of that organization, and you could see visual tales. Are they committed? And so if you start to see all those positive indicators, then you're going into an environment where you're set up for success, but also that they're serious for the long haul. Because if it's just, hey, we just, this thing is going on with the country, you're it for now. But, if you hear those types of things, you have to really consider, are you serious? And I think consumers are looking as well. They're looking to understand those commitments. And if they don't see those commitments, they'll vote with their feet.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that we're building out is a Chief Diversity Officer Council, just to provide safe space for support, also for resource sharing, so that people and diverse industries and companies can come together and figure out, the best ways, and to help to try to get smart on one, sort of pattern recognition of do's and don'ts and, green lights and red lights, but also two, what we're seeing. It's one thing to see it in your company. It's another thing you start seeing the same thing across companies. And there just seems to be a lot of disconnection between those who are trying to operate in the same space. And so it's amazing, just since we've started talking and planning for this summit, we've had any number of persons, companies, as well as individual consultants who are coming on and saying, yes, finally, thank you, there's a place where we can go and belong. So I'm interested to hear from both of you all as sort of survivors. That's how I'm looking at you all, as to, what do you see as real opportunities for collaboration? So as an example, look at the fact that, but what I hear both of you all saying is there needs to be a stick and carrot approach. There needs to be, honest conversation and encouragement for corporate philanthropy and good corporate citizenship as it relates to promoting diversity, equity, inclusion. But there also has to be a level of accountability so that everyone's not grading their own math and giving themselves A's. So talk to me about, if you were helping to craft this platform and this organization, what would be your first couple steps whether it's on the contracting side or the employment side, or we haven't really talked even yet about the investment side in terms of investing in communities that have been systemically crushed and left out of development for decades. But talk to me about how you would go about this work from what you've seen. Let's go back to you now. I feel like I'm a host on MSNBC or something.
One thing that I think is left out of the conversation, or even just within corporations around diversity and inclusion, is the community engagement piece. Because everyone is looking to hire diverse talent or have a diverse slate considered for a role. The culture within the company, employee resource groups. This is great. This is everything internal. But what's going on in your communities that you serve and your clients? Your clients are looking to see if diversity exists within your organization and the organizations you serve. Your clients, your customers, the companies that you do business with, are they diverse? So I think the community engagement piece is very important, particularly in this time, that organizations really need to pay attention to and include it in their holistic D&I strategy. So I will say that engaging our communities, our nonprofits, like you said, you can donate millions of dollars to NAACP, but then what? What are you going to do after that? Or are you building your relationships with these organizations? Are you partnering with them? Are you sponsoring them? So I think we really need to pay close attention to the communities that we serve as part of this D&I strategy. So that's one piece that I would definitely focus on as a D&I leader, is what's going on around us and the communities that we sit in.
Absolutely. And we've seen, gentrification, and it's interesting now that we're seeing the reverse of gentrification because of the pandemic, where now everybody's looking to get out of the city and find more square footage. And it seems as if oftentimes our community in particular is pushed out or pulled in based on what we can afford and what we can no longer afford. And so to see how companies will be being stewards over the investments in those communities. I'm a pastor, and so I can tell you right now that my congregation is a commuter congregation. Oftentimes, the needs of our local community don't match those who sometimes sit in the pew. And so that's often the same case with many companies. The companies may be very well leveraged, but they may have taken off a beachhead into a developing community. And so how do you just not drive folks out? I think it's an excellent point. One of the things that we're doing here with Black Idea is actually developing ground level community development relationships. So one of the presenters is Enterprise Community Partners. They're a national outfit. And one of the things they do is they do market research, and they partner with small and medium-sized companies and community-based organizations who are trying to get up, who are trying to build their portfolio. They do a lot of great work in the housing space, affordable housing, senior housing. And so that's actually what we're doing right now, is to make sure that we're not leaving that piece off the table.
Great.
Very good. And Bernard, I want to hear, so now you're in my seat and you're building this organization. And what are you going to make sure that I don't leave off the table or I'm not missing?
I think the most important thing, and that's a really great question, building off of what you both have shared, is it needs to be multi-tiered. So most organizations I've noticed, when they start, they only focus on one area, and I get that. That feels easy. Let's put our training wheels on and ease into it, but it needs to be a holistic strategy. Like at Gusto, we focus on four different pillars, if you will. That's the DE&I program. So we call it RISE, representation, inclusion, social impact, and equity. So when you think about those four pillars within RISE, so there's a representation piece, like making sure, are we reflective of the communities we serve? Are we aspiring to do so? Because if you need to understand your market, it's very difficult to do so if you don't have any of those folks at the table. You could be missing the market entirely, just settling for segments, right? So then there's inclusion. I look at a lot of that as the education and awareness piece. A lot of information that we were taught as children in public schools, we didn't get all the information. We were shared a version of history that left out a lot. So a lot of folks are arriving to this moment, really not understanding the vestiges of the past and how they impact the future. So there really needs to be an education component to make sure folks really understand what's going on, because without that context, it's very difficult to conceptualize what we need to do next. Then there's the social impact piece. We talked about how do you get back into the community? How are you engaging? It can't be performative. So you do have to give back to society. I think a lot of folks are looking to organizations to be more, take on more of a leadership role. And then there's just the equity pieces, making sure that people have equitable access so you have an equal playing field. So while the outcomes might not be the same, at least everyone knew they had a fair shot at achieving these things. So I think when you take that in totality and you're starting an organization like this, you need helping folks understand it needs to be holistic. It needs to address multiple pillars if it's going to be successful. And then providing them with the resources and education so that way they, I think the best thing I could say is are set up for success. So they're armed with information. So when they go into the organizations, when they go into the respective communities, they are readily prepared to pull on that information, to pull on a community so that way they can have the impact they're seeking.
Absolutely. That's a great frame. So I was thinking about your pillars. We have 3 pillars, which are investment, contracting, and employment. Then the whole idea was we don't want to just interface with companies, at a one-dimensional plane and leave all these other very important, vital business, essential business strategies and issues off the table. So if I'm going to talk to, Bank of America, who's pledged $1 billion, and that's awesome, to this space, I don't want to just talk to them about how many African Americans are hired. I also want to talk to them about who they're doing business with. I also want to talk to them about their investment in local communities. I mean, they actually are a bank and they actually do make investments and they get, credit from the CRA. But at the end of the day, we want to see how that's going. And so we talked a lot from the business perspective and sort of everyone having agency as companies, opting in, opting out, sort of choosing their space. We talked a little about accountability, but there's another level of accountability as it relates to policy and how policy can help to do this. We don't want to just go in with one hand. And while we recognize that oftentimes corporations have bristled and pushed back against any kind of regulation, we also recognize without that kind of regulation, we probably wouldn't be sitting where we are right now. And so there has to be a point where policy comes into play and pushes the conversation and pushes, quite frankly, the numbers to where they need to be. From your space, have you seen policies that were in place on the books that could be sharpened to be more impactful? I think there are a number of studies that indicate that while affirmative action was passed over half a century ago, what we have yet to see is how African Americans have fully benefited. Oftentimes, it's quite frankly statistically been white women who were the biggest winners in much of the affirmative action business that came out of it because they checked the box for diversity. And so if you look at a number of diversity councils now in major corporations, they can boast that they have, 30 or 40% diversity. But when you actually look at the African American participation, it's below our representation in the population. It's below 10, 12%. So talk to me about any policy ideas or initiatives that you've seen that either are lacking or need to be sharpened.
One policy that I recall when I was at CBS, we did have in our procurement policy. So supplier diversity is a purchasing function. So we sat in the global sourcing procurement organization. And one policy that we did implement is that through the RFP platform or the tool, as our buyers and our category managers are running these RFPs and running these negotiations and contracts through our system, there was a window within the tool that will ask you if you considered a diverse supplier, a diverse business for this opportunity. It will not let you go to the next page unless you would either check yes or no. If you said checked no, then another window would pop up and we need a justification as to why. And the justification could be, well, this is just, there aren't any diverse suppliers that provided this particular service and you need to justify why. Or if it's something so specific, okay, we understand. But if it's something like, I don't know, janitorial services or office supplies, we know that as a supplier diversity leader, there are tons of diverse suppliers that provide that particular service. And another question in that window is, did you engage with the supplier diversity team to do any outsourcing, or did you find any suppliers through this actual resource that is internal, that sits in your department? So we do ask these important questions that will not allow them to move forward in the actual RFP tool. Because I know we have deadlines, we're trying to purchase things, we're trying to fill these gaps, but we still have these policies in place to make sure that the justification is there. And once they are able to get past that screen, then they can move forward with the rest of the process. So I think it's very important to ask these leaders, are you doing the right thing? We have these policies in place for you to follow them, for you to actually read them, pay attention to them, and follow the rules. So as a leader in that space, my job was to do an audit of all of these RFPs that come through, and I'll sit in the project management meetings, and I know which projects are coming down the pipe, and I can think, like off the top of my head, this supplier would be perfect for this RFP. Have you considered them? So as leaders in this space, we have to engage with these buyers, our category managers, and to educate them on what is out there and what exists. And my job as the gatekeeper is to make sure they are vetted so I can present them to the buyers who are actually doing the contracting opportunity through the RFP system. And that's when the award happens and so forth. So there are policies in place, but we do have to hold not only our leadership accountable, but the folks that are working around us. They are supporting the initiative, but we need to hold them accountable and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do to support supplier diversity.
Right. And one of the things that we often hear is, it's a bottom line issue, and we want to make sure that, pricing is competitive. And oftentimes larger companies get better pricing just because of scale. And so, minority companies at their startups are buying everything at a premium. Their costs are coming at a premium, so they're coming higher. But here's what we also know. In corporate America, if you use the word strategy, you can get funding for anything. So it's part of our strategy and a part of our strategic plan to prioritize these things. And all of a sudden, new resources open up. And so part of knowing the system is also understanding the game and being able to toggle back and forth organically to recognize what's really going on and how to push those things forward. Very helpful, Natalie. But I don't want to hear from you as well. Put on your policy hat now, Mr. CEO or Mr. Congressman, and give me some policies that you think you've seen that should be improved, or things that are not even there that should be there to help improve the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was thinking as you two were speaking, what could be put in place? Because I think first off, it is using the existing policies you have in place and helping people understand that they even exist, that they're properly interpreted, that they're properly implemented. So that way folks do have access to what already exists. Because a lot of times you might have great policy, but with poor implementation or people not understanding it has unintended consequences, right? So I think if you were able to better help people understand and navigate that process and remind them of these steps and why this is important, I do think it unlocks in a way. But if a law is sitting there, all dusty and no one sees it and is not aware of it, then it's totally missing the mark. Let's say that. I do think in terms of putting my policy hat on, what I'd love to see is this a level of commitment. We see at the federal level, it's pretty buttoned up in terms of what is expected of you. How it should be gone about. But I think looking up and down, when I look at elected officials, we always focus on the federal. We don't look at the municipalities. We don't look at the localities. But I mean, there's small businesses thriving in those places. And what I'd love to see is a more uniform way of going about it. So that way, this is a very difficult process if you're a small business trying to navigate the myriad of laws and ways that you can procure and work with the government or the local government. So I think what I love to see is a simplification of process, so that way folks can it would allow more folks to participate versus, this is just off the cuff conversation. A friend reached out to me about, she was contemplating setting up a supplier diversity program. And I was thinking about like all the different certifying bodies. Do you self-certify with your minority status? And just making it simpler. Because that in itself is daunting. We have to take 10 classes just to be able to participate. And I feel like there's barriers are erected just to discourage people from participation. And even though those folks might have all the capabilities, if it's that difficult just to even figure out how to participate, then that it's not having its intended impact. So I would love to see a simplification of the process from locality up to the federal government. So that way I had a bidding process that was more open, fair, and clear. So when the RFP comes out, I can actually compete with everyone versus the bigger company who might have the lawyers and the team to kind of basically curtail competition and get 100% of that pie. You know, when I've seen it done well, it's when folks have, you know, there might be the prime and you need a sub, and you can work together in partnership and find the economies of scale to work for both of those organizations so that everyone can have a piece of that bid. It does well by the prime and the sub, and it meets all the capabilities. If you could do it that way, that allows for that small business to grow to be a medium-sized business and become that big company that we were all hoping it can become, because everyone understands how you should operate in the processes. So I think a lot of the existing rules are there, like simplify it so people can have access to it.
That's very helpful. And one of the things that we've put in place is a whole policy initiative with the Black Idea. So one of our partners is the Joint Center for Economic and Political Studies. They're the Black think tank. They're actually turning 50 years old this year. I'm very proud of them. They've been a standalone forever. And they are going to be helping us to identify initiatives and opportunities. And I think simplification, particularly at the state and local level, is extremely important. Oftentimes we don't appreciate, we focus so much, as you said, on the federal budget, on the federal laws, and not realizing that there are billions and trillions of dollars that are going through state and local that are being awarded, you know, in bids. One of the things that we've insisted at our church is that whenever we've done projects, we've done a number of them, is that there has to be a very significant MBE requirement. And so the reason I know the game is because they've tried to run the game on me as the owner. And I'm like, but I know that's not right. Like I actually know the owners of these companies. Some of them go to our church. You can't tell me that they don't exist. Or it's going to cost us X, Y, and Z if we go higher. And again, you know, sometimes it is a matter of scale and they can't compete, but we've been able to engage the exact kind of partnerships that you described, where we've had a larger vendor partner with a Black company, and it worked well for both of them. And it helped to increase the portfolio of the smaller company, allow them to get great experience, because what we know is business is still people business, and whatever the business is, it's a people business. And most companies, the leader will tell you somebody took them aside, took a special interest in them, and showed them the tricks of the trade, showed them how the game is played, and that allowed them to get to where they are.
One thing I would add to that is the service component. If we are working with a large company, like for instance, Dell, and then there is a Black-owned technology reseller that partners with Dell, they get a deep discount, they'll give us a deep discount, and they are dedicated to just providing computers and technology products just for our company, the service levels are through the roof. So not only are we getting a deep discount, we're not dealing with the different call centers if we need support calling Dell. We can call our diverse-owned reseller to solve the problem right away. So they are dedicated to us, and the service levels really matter. So that's one thing we need to keep in mind is, yeah, we can get great competitive pricing, but how's the service? And are you committed to providing great service to us as your number one client? We can only be their one client and receive the best service. So that is one thing I keep in mind when I'm talking to our stakeholders is we can partner with these large organizations, but when we have a smaller organization that is dedicated to just us, we can be selfish with this one particular supplier. The service outbeats the pricing. So at that point, we really need to focus on the service levels. That's important to us as an organization.
Absolutely. And one of the things we're doing is, as we're signing on operational partners, particularly in the consulting space, is we're taking partners of all sizes for the exact reason that you say. Somebody needs a one-person show, somebody needs a mid-level company, and somebody needs a behemoth. And for very, different reasons. And we don't want to we think that competition is a natural part of the market and it's always good. We also think that diversity actually in the kind of businesses and sizing is equally important. So we're very excited about this space. I know everybody's got to go, so I'm going to try to wrap it up. But if I could give you your magic wand, and in this moment, after all that we've gone through in 2020, I saw something on the internet that just has stuck with me. It said, I just woke up today to see what page from Revelation we're doing today in 2020, just because every day is crazy, right? But if after all we've suffered through 2020, as it relates to promoting Black business and achieving Black parity in business, give me, sort of your one wish list. Now, so that means you have to take off all your technological limitations and all your financial limitations. And, you're the king or queen of the world. How are we going to move this thing forward dynamically? And I'm going to do this, since Bernard had all this time to think of his answer the last time, because now he took the lead, but I'm going to throw it to you first.
Okay, I'm in the hot seat. If I had infinite resources and money, I think I'd go deeper. I'd start with our U.S. education system, because many folks, this history that we just weren't taught.
That's great.
Which reverberates in the workplace. If diversity and inclusion is important to you, and this is the first time you're facing that, perhaps either in college or definitely in the workplace, where it might be the most diverse place you've encountered, you're meeting this for the first time. And then it compounds, because I'm not only am I new to this, I'm making hiring decisions, making firing decisions, I'm making procurement decisions, not understanding any at all the history. So I would personally love to see our educational system be more reflective of the history of America, and not spoken by one person, but like the plurality of Americans, where it shows the true stories of what happened. And I think people would be more informed. I think I saw a stat the other day that said 2/3 of America's youth don't know that the Holocaust happened.
Wow.
So if you didn't know the Holocaust happened, then what do you know about slavery and what enslaved people faced? Or just the Civil Rights Act, or anything that happened in America of significance as it relates to what's happening now. So my deep feeling would be, if we could start there and lay those seeds now, you wouldn't see the fruits of your labor for some time. But if those kids grew up with greater understanding, they'd have a greater operational functioning when they get to the workplace, and would think like, oh, this isn't for now. This is restorative to heal the things of the past. So that way that the systemic things that we saw 20 years past, we could start correcting, because we actually have a full understanding, versus like, what are you talking about? And then having this level of awareness, like a George Floyd moment, where people are actually paying attention and focus. So I would start there, and I feel like that would be the unlock. But that's a lot of, that would be federal, state, everyone working together to actually say, like, this is the history of America as we choose it, as it actually occurred, versus like, for instance, I'm from Virginia versus California history books. It's entirely different. So I would love to see that if I can wave a magic wand.
Very good. Very thoughtful. I really appreciate it. Natalie?
Yeah, to stay on, I guess, the government wavelength, I would focus on the election, not to even make this political, but this is the most important election of our time. We've seen so much happen, and just this year alone, and we didn't even cover COVID-19 and how that's impacted our communities, our small businesses that have not reopened and won't reopen, and just some of the decisions from our leader. It's just so important that we encourage all and everybody to go vote in November. And I think that we will see a lot of change actually take into effect, and see these action plans once we go out and vote. And that's one thing that I pray about. I pray about after November 3rd, we are going to see change. And that is starting from the top, the leadership, and funneling down. So I would definitely, with my magic wand, I would have everyone go to the polls and vote. And just one addition to that, I'm an HBCU grad, and this week is HBCU Impact Week. And that's another thing that I'm passionate about, is supporting our historically Black colleges. That is so important to just the culture, to our community. And those are just things that are so important to me. And so HBCUs, the election, and just diversity and inclusion, this is just a time for us to just move. And I feel like now we will see some impact.
And what HBCU was that?
North Carolina A&T State University.
Very nice. You see, I should put it all in there, Bernard, in one statement. That's
I had to.
I went to Hampton University, so I forgive you. But that, you know.
Well, bless both of y'all. I went to Howard. Anyhow, but I think, you know, it's not by accident that HBCU's leaders are in this frame, because there is something significant that takes nothing away from all of our PWI brothers and sisters, but there's something significant and unique that you receive that can't be duplicated. Often imitated, but never duplicated, right? That's what they say during the Showtime marching band. But the point is, there is, I mean, it's not a partisan statement to say that the difference and the platforms of the candidates this year could not be more stark. If there is change, then I think the work that we're doing now will it's like you'll add fuel to everything that we're putting in place now, because if there is a new administration, they'll come in with a mandate to do a lot, and we'll be poised to do that. If there's not a change, then this work that we're doing will be even that much more vital, because we'll be signing up for another 4 years of what we've already experienced, and who knows to go from there. So I just want to thank each and every one of both of you for your time this morning, for your contribution, but for what you're doing when you're not on Zoom to make a difference in the lives of our people and communities and companies throughout the nation. So thank you so very much. And we look forward to staying in touch with you and helping us to build this out. If you're like me, you are enthused, excited, and animated, ready to get to work. And that's why we named this the Black Idea Coalition, because it's inclusion, diversity, equity in action. And so now is the time to take action. Here's what I want you to do. If you're an individual who wants to be a part of this movement, we need your support. We need you to join in. Go to our website and just click the Join tab. And we want to capture information so that as we're scaling, as we're growing, and as we are holding companies accountable, we'll need you to build out our network and to help to bring attention to issues that are relevant and issues that will impact the life of Black business world. And so please make sure you connect with us. But also, if you represent an organization that is doing the work of trying to develop capacity in the DEI space, maybe you are an educational institution, or maybe you're a private equity firm, maybe you're a company, and you want to be a part of this ecosystem, this space where business is being transacted. We've already seen a number of new relationships that have developed and are going to be profitable for those who are involved. We want to be a part of that ecosystem too. And so if you're a business leader, if you're a business owner, if you are anywhere a part of the Deal Flow platform, we want to encourage you to indicate that on the form as well. And then finally, if you're an institution that recognizes you need some help in this D&I space, you want to get your diversity and equity and inclusion game right, you want to make sure that you have the benefit of the partners that are part of the coalition. So please make sure that you indicate that as well. Join, help others to join in, let them know that this is the place that's going to make a difference in the world and in the Black business world as we continue to build equity and to build one another up. So grateful for all those who've been serving and working with us, and we're getting excited because we know that better things are on the horizon. I just want to say thanks to everybody who's been a part of this, who's been a part of this production, all of our panelists, all of our presenters, everybody who's been working behind the scenes, pushing buttons and pulling levers to make everything flow smoothly and seamlessly. And now the work begins. And so please stay in touch with us. Make sure that you like us on social media, our social media platforms. Make sure you come back to our website and see the new updated articles and blogs that'll be happening. There's so much going on. We want to make sure that you're a part of it. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day.